On my prom night, my boyfriend abandoned me for my best friend, leaving me stranded in the rain. They mocked me thinking I'd never be anything without them. Years later, when they showed up to my exclusive gala, they realized too late who I had become. The air was thick with anticipation. Prom night. The grand event that every high school student dreamt of. The night where fairy tales seemed possible, where the stars aligned just right, and the world whispered promises of forever. For me, Lena Carter, it was supposed to be magical. I had the perfect dress. A soft, flowing creation of satin and lace in midnight blue, a color Jason once told me made my eyes look enchanting. My hair was styled in elegant waves, my makeup subtle yet alluring. This night I thought would be the kind of memory I'd hold close forever. Jason, my boyfriend of 2 years, had promised we'd dance until our feet ached. He had whispered those words with the kind of devotion that made me believe in happily ever afters. And then there was Emily, my best friend since childhood, the sister I never had. She had helped me pick out my dress, assured me I'd be the most stunning girl in the room. Looking back, I should have noticed the lingering glances between her and Jason, the way she avoided my eyes whenever I gushed about how lucky I was to have him. But love makes fools of us all, and I had been the biggest fool of them all. Before we dive into this gripping tale of power, redemption, and ultimate victory, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. If you enjoy stories of transformation, resilience, and getting the last word in style, make sure to subscribe. It's free and helps us bring more compelling narratives to life. Now let's begin. The ballroom was dazzling, golden chandeliers casting shimmering reflections across the polished floor. The music pulsed through my veins, the scent of roses and expensive perfume filling the air. Laughter echoed from every corner as students basked in the joy of youth and fleeting freedom. I was laughing too, unaware that my world was about to shatter. Jason had been acting strange all night, distracted, his grip on my hand loose. I chalked it up to nerves, assuming he had some grand romantic surprise planned. Then, just as the DJ called out the final dance of the night, Jason stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. My heart pounded. Was this it? A grand declaration of love? My breath hitched as he smiled, until he turned his gaze not to me but to Emily. "Lena," he began, and for a fleeting second, I believed I was about to hear something beautiful. "I think we need to be honest here. You're a great girl, but you're just not the one for me." Silence swallowed the room. My pulse roared in my ears. I felt my knees weaken, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What?" My voice was barely a whisper. Jason exhaled dramatically, as if this was a scene he had rehearsed in his head 100 times. "Emily and we've been seeing each other for a while now." A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. I turned to Emily, searching for denial, for regret. But all I found was a smug, victorious smirk. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "But it just happened. Just happened." The words repeated in my head over and over until they became meaningless noise. My hands trembled. I could feel 1,000 eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to break. Jason chuckled, his arm now draped around Emily's waist. "Come on, Lena. Did you really think you could keep up with us? We're moving on to bigger things. You're just you." Laughter erupted from the crowd, not from everyone, but enough to make my face burn with humiliation. My vision blurred with unshed tears, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. I turned on my heel and ran, the sound of their laughter chasing me as I pushed through the doors and into the storm outside. Rain pelted against my skin, soaking through my dress, my hair, my very bones. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold together the fragments of my shattered heart. I had loved him. I had trusted her. And in return they had turned me into nothing more than a joke. I don't know how long I stood there in the rain, the world around me blurred and distorted by heartbreak and betrayal. Cars honked in the distance, the streetlights flickering above me like indifferent stars. I should have gone home, should have sought comfort in my family, but the idea of walking into my house and explaining what had happened felt like another layer of agony I wasn't ready to face. Then, as if the universe wasn't finished breaking me, I heard them, Jason and Emily, emerging from the venue, their laughter ringing through the night. "You should have seen her face," Jason snickered. "Pathetic," Emily added, not even bothering to lower her voice. A car door slammed. I watched through the curtain of rain as Jason revved his engine, tires screeching against the wet pavement as they drove away, leaving me there, drenched, abandoned, humiliated. For the first time in my life I felt truly, utterly alone. But as the cold seeped into my skin, another feeling began to stir beneath the heartbreak. It was faint, buried beneath layers of pain and betrayal, but it was there. A spark. A whisper of something dark and unrelenting. They thought I would crumble. They thought I was weak. They thought I was nothing. That night as I stood in the rain, I made a silent vow. I would become something greater than they could ever imagine. I would rise not despite them but because of them. They had taken everything from me. But one day I would take everything from them. The rain poured relentlessly as I stood motionless on the empty sidewalk, my soaked dress clinging to my trembling frame. Jason and Emily's laughter had long faded into the distance, yet the sound of their cruelty echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. The weight of betrayal pressed down on my chest, suffocating, unrelenting. I didn't know how long I stayed there, my fingers digging into my arms as if holding myself together could prevent the world from completely unraveling. Cars passed, their headlights illuminating my shattered reflection in puddles along the street. The girl staring back was unfamiliar. Broken, discarded, humiliated. I had two choices. I could go home, crawl into bed and let the pain consume me. Or I could let this night be the turning point, the moment I decided that I would never be weak again. I turned on my heel, my soaked heels clicking against the pavement as I walked away from the school, away from the place that had watched me crumble. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I would never be the same girl who had walked into that ballroom full of hope and trust. That version of me had vanished in the storm. The following weeks were unbearable. At school, whispers followed me down every hallway. People glanced at me with a mix of amusement and pity, their hushed voices retelling the same cruel story. How Jason had chosen Emily over me, how I had stood there frozen as my world fell apart. Emily, ever the actress, played the role of the reluctant victor. She put on a show of guilt, telling anyone who would listen that she'd never wanted to hurt me, that it just happened. Jason, on the other hand, reveled in his new position, wearing his betrayal like a badge of honor. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the way people looked at me, as if I were fragile, incapable, insignificant. That was the moment I realized something that changed everything. It wasn't just Jason and Emily who thought I was beneath them. It was everyone. That realization fueled a fire inside me, burning away the sorrow and replacing it with something far more powerful: determination. I cut ties with everyone. The so-called friends who had laughed behind my back. The classmates who gossiped about my downfall. Even the teachers who had once praised my potential now looked at me with quiet sympathy. I erased them all from my life. I stopped attending school events, ignored invitations and deleted my social media accounts. If the world wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would let them, because when I returned I wouldn't just exist. I would dominate. Every moment of pain became fuel. I studied harder than ever, spending sleepless nights buried in books, determined to secure a future so grand that no one would ever doubt me again. I took every advanced course I could, pushing myself past exhaustion, past limits I never knew existed. But it wasn't just academics. I transformed myself entirely. I took control of my fitness, training relentlessly, strengthening my body as much as my mind. I changed the way I spoke, the way I carried myself. I stopped seeking approval, stopped apologizing for taking up space. By the time graduation arrived, I was a different person. I walked across that stage, head high, expression unreadable. Jason and Emily were still together, still believing they had won. But I had long since realized that their so-called victory was temporary. They had taken my heart and crushed it beneath their heels. But I was building something far greater than anything they could ever dream of. After graduation, I vanished. I didn't just leave town, I erased my past entirely. No social media, no messages, no trace. I stepped into a new world, a new identity. College became my battleground. I entered a world where no one knew my past, where I could craft my narrative from scratch. And I did. I excelled in everything I touched, networking with the right people, seizing opportunities, and building a reputation that spoke of power, intelligence, and ambition. Over the years, I climbed higher and higher. I built an empire, not just wealth but influence. My name, Lena Beaumont, became synonymous with success. People sought my approval, my presence. My decisions shaped industries, my words carried weight. And through it all, I never forgot that night. The rain. The laughter. The betrayal. I had turned my pain into my greatest weapon. And now it was time to use it. Because while I had risen to heights they could never imagine, Jason and Emily had remained exactly where I had left them, believing they had won. But they had no idea what was coming. I had spent years preparing for this moment, carefully ensuring that when I made my move, it would be absolute. It wasn't about revenge in the way most people understood it. I didn't want to ruin them in a fit of anger. I wanted something far greater. I wanted them to see what they had thrown away. I wanted them to realize too late that they had never truly won. And I had the perfect plan to make that happen. It started with an invitation. A gilded envelope, embossed with the insignia of my exclusive luxury brand. A personal invite to an event so grand, so prestigious, that only the most elite members of society would have the privilege of attending. Jason and Emily had spent years chasing success, trying to climb social ladders that always seemed just out of reach. They had settled into a life of mediocrity, still clinging to the belief that they were meant for something more. So when that invitation arrived, they saw it as their chance. They had no idea that it was a trap. A beautifully designed, exquisitely crafted trap. As they held that invitation in their hands, as they excitedly planned their entrance, as they imagined the doors that would open for them, they had no idea that they were walking straight into the final act of my story. The story I had been writing since the night they left me standing in the rain. And soon they would finally understand. Revenge isn't about rage. It isn't about chaos. It's about control. And I had spent years mastering it. Jason and Emily had no idea what awaited them. That invitation in their hands wasn't a golden opportunity. It was a meticulously planned doorway to their downfall. Years of patience, of quiet calculation had led to this moment. I had built my empire with ruthless precision, leaving no room for mistakes. Every move had been strategic, every decision purposeful. Now the final act was in motion and they were stepping into it completely unaware. The gala would be unlike anything they had ever experienced. Hosted in one of the most luxurious venues in the city, a glass-walled masterpiece overlooking the skyline. It was designed for the elite, the kind of people Jason and Emily had always aspired to be. It was a symbol of wealth, power, and influence, a world they had spent years trying to infiltrate without success. And now, as they held that invitation, they believed their time had come. I watched from a distance as Jason struggled to contain his excitement. His once effortless charm had dulled with time, and the weight of financial struggles was evident in the way his smile strained at the corners. Emily, still clinging to her past beauty, adjusted her reflection in a compact mirror, ensuring she looked the part. They thought they were on the verge of something grand. They thought they had been chosen. As the night of the gala approached, my team worked tirelessly to perfect every detail. The guest list had been carefully curated, ensuring that every individual in attendance was someone of true significance. Celebrities, industry moguls, political figures, the kind of people who dictated the course of the world with a mere word. Jason and Emily, oblivious to the truth, had no idea that they were stepping into a gathering where they would be the lowest in status, surrounded by those who would see them for what they truly were, pretenders. The night arrived and the venue gleamed like a beacon of power. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow across the grand hall, while a live orchestra played a melody that resonated with sophistication. Guests arrived in sleek, expensive vehicles, their presence alone commanding attention. It was the kind of event that most people only read about, a gathering reserved for those who truly mattered. Jason and Emily arrived late, a deliberate choice on their part. They wanted to make an entrance to be noticed. But as they stepped onto the marble floors, the grandeur of the event consumed them. Their expressions flickered between awe and intimidation. They had expected luxury, but they hadn't anticipated the overwhelming presence of the world's most powerful figures. I watched them from a distance, unseen, just as I had planned. I had become a master of control, of orchestrating situations without ever being directly involved. I observed the way Jason nervously adjusted his tie, the way Emily clutched his arm just a little too tightly. They were out of their depth and it was starting to sink in. As they moved through the crowd, they tried to blend in, forcing confident smiles and initiating conversations with anyone who would listen. But they quickly realized the stark reality of their situation. No one knew who they were. No one cared. Every attempt at conversation was met with polite dismissal. Every introduction brushed aside with effortless disinterest. They were insignificant background noise in a world that had no space for them. Then came the moment they had been waiting for, the host's arrival. The murmurs began as I made my entrance, escorted by individuals whose influence reached beyond borders. The shift in energy was palpable. Eyes turned toward me, conversations paused, and the weight of my presence settled over the room like a carefully placed hand on a chessboard. Jason and Emily, caught in the middle of it all, froze. Recognition dawned on their faces, slow and agonizing. Jason's expression tightened, his posture stiffening as realization set in. Emily, once so composed, visibly paled, her grip on his arm turning rigid. I let them stare, let them absorb the truth they had spent years unaware of. The Lena they had abandoned on that rainy night was gone. In her place stood someone untouchable, someone they could never reach. Jason was the first to recover, forcing a strange smile as he approached. Lena. He hesitated as if saying my name felt foreign. I had no idea. I met his gaze with an unreadable expression, allowing the silence to stretch between us. The power of silence is often underestimated, but in moments like these, it speaks louder than any words could. Emily, desperate to regain control, forced a laugh. We were just talking about how incredible this event is. You must be so. I tilted my head slightly, my gaze sharp. You shouldn't be here. My voice was calm, measured, yet it sliced through the air with quiet finality. Jason faltered. But, we were invited. A small, knowing smile played at my lips. Were you? The weight of the question settled heavily between us. Doubt flickered in their eyes. Had they truly been invited? Had they misread the situation? Emily's hand clenched into a fist at her side, her confidence crumbling. Lena, we. I turned away before she could finish, shifting my attention to the people who actually mattered. With a simple nod, security subtly moved in, ensuring that Jason and Emily found themselves gently but firmly guided toward the exit. They didn't resist. They couldn't. As they disappeared through the grand doors, I allowed myself a quiet breath of satisfaction. But this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. Jason and Emily had spent years believing they had won, believing they had walked away victorious. But as they stood outside the venue, shunned and humiliated, they finally understood the truth. They hadn't won. They had simply delayed their realization of what true power looked like. And now they would live with that knowledge, knowing that the girl they had once betrayed had risen beyond their reach. I had built an empire. I had reshaped my world. And now, as I stood in the midst of power and influence, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was untouchable. Jason and Emily stood outside the grand venue, their once bright expressions drained of color. The realization had settled in like a slow-moving storm. This was never an opportunity. It had always been a carefully laid trap. The whispers around them were deafening, not in volume but in weight. The security guards, though polite, had been firm in their dismissal, ensuring that the doors of high society would remain permanently shut in their faces. Emily adjusted the hem of her overpriced dress, her hands trembling as she glanced around, desperate to salvage her dignity. Jason, ever the actor, forced a laugh, trying to pretend as if this was some kind of misunderstanding. It's probably just a mistake, he muttered, mostly to himself. Lena wouldn't do this to us. But the sinking feeling in his gut told him otherwise. He had recognized that look in my eyes inside the ballroom, the same look he had once worn when he humiliated me all those years ago. The tables had turned and there was no undoing what had just happened. Emily exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. Let's just go. This isn't worth it. But it was worth it. At least to me. As they stepped away from the venue, a photographer discreetly snapped pictures from the shadows. Not a paparazzo. No, that would be too easy. This was someone I had hired specifically for this moment, someone who would ensure their public embarrassment spread exactly as planned. The next morning, tabloids ran the headline, "Wannabe socialites denied entry to elite gala. Who are they really?" Their photos were plastered across social media. The comments were ruthless. People speculated on their identities, mocking their desperation to belong. The narrative had shifted. Jason and Emily, once so confident in their ability to navigate social circles, were now the subjects of ridicule. And the best part? They didn't even know it was orchestrated. Jason's phone buzzed endlessly that day, former acquaintances distancing themselves, colleagues avoiding him. Emily, who had prided herself on her beauty and status, found herself blocked from the very influencers she had spent years trying to impress. I watched it unfold from a distance, sipping my morning coffee as I read through the comments. The fall was just beginning. A few days later, an envelope arrived at their doorstep. No return address, no signature. Just a thick ivory invitation card with gold foil lettering. Lena Beaumont requests your presence for a private dinner. A chance to understand. Jason hesitated as he read it, his fingers tightening around the cardstock. It's a setup, he muttered. It has to be. Emily, who had been spiraling since the gala, snatched the invitation from his hands. Do we have a choice? She asked, her voice brittle. We're already being laughed at. If there's a way to fix this, we take it. And just like that, they walked willingly into the second part of the trap. The restaurant I had chosen was one of the most exclusive in the city. The kind of place that required months of reservations, where privacy was ensured for only the most important guests. When Jason and Emily arrived, they were led to a secluded, candlelit booth in the back. I was already there waiting. Dressed in an elegant, sharp ensemble, I exuded the kind of effortless confidence they had never believed I was capable of. As they slid into the booth across from me, the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Jason cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Lena, you look different. I took a slow sip of my wine before setting the glass down deliberately. It's been years after all. Emily, trying to reclaim whatever power she still had, leaned forward. Why are we here? I let the silence stretch between us, allowing them to sit in their own discomfort before I finally answered. Because I wanted to see you one last time. Before we part ways permanently. Jason frowned, shifting uneasily in his seat. Part ways? I tilted my head slightly. Surely you didn't think I invited you here to fix things? To reminisce about the past? I let out a soft, amused breath. No. This is simply closure. Emily's face hardened. If this is about prom night. I leaned in, my expression unreadable. It's not about one night. It's about a lifetime of underestimation. About how you both saw me as disposable. As insignificant. I folded my hands together. But now, I'm the one sitting here with the power to decide what happens next. Jason swallowed, the reality of the situation finally settling in. Lena, look, we were kids back then. We made mistakes. I let his words hang in the air before offering a small smile. And now you're living with them. The waiter arrived, setting down an expensive bottle of wine. Neither Jason nor Emily touched their glasses. I continued, my tone calm but cutting. You see, I don't need revenge in the way you think. I don't need to ruin you. I just needed you to know that I could. I let that sink in. That's the real punishment. Living every day knowing that you were wrong. Knowing that you lost something far greater than you ever realized. Emily's nails dug into the tablecloth. So this was all just to humiliate us? I shook my head. No. This was to show you that you were never as untouchable as you thought. Jason exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted, worn down from the weight of it all. What do you want from us, Lena? I stood up, smoothing down the fabric of my dress. Nothing. I met their eyes one last time. Because unlike you, I don't need validation from the past. My life is already exactly as I want it to be. I turned to leave, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Just as I reached the exit, I glanced over my shoulder. Enjoy your meal. It's on me. And with that, I walked away, leaving them behind exactly where they had always belonged. In the past. As I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of city life. The streets were aglow with the soft flicker of streetlights, their reflections dancing on the wet pavement. I paused, letting the moment sink in. Behind me, Jason and Emily remained trapped in a silence of their own making, drowning in the weight of realization. I walked towards my car, the engine purring to life with a smooth hum. Through the tinted windows, I watched the restaurant's entrance, waiting. A part of me wondered if Jason or Emily would come running out, making some last-ditch effort to plead their case. But they didn't. They wouldn't. Because deep down they finally understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. And they had lost. As I drove away, my phone vibrated beside me. A single message from an unknown number. But I knew exactly who it was. Why did you do this? I let out a quiet breath, fingers tightening on the wheel. A response wasn't necessary. He had his answer. The days following our final meeting unraveled exactly as I had expected. The media cycle continued to feast on their downfall, the internet ablaze with speculation. The elite circles they had once admired wanted nothing to do with them. Their names had become synonymous with desperation, their faces a cautionary tale. Doors that had once been slightly open slammed shut with finality. But this wasn't just about their social exile. That was simply the surface wound. The real damage was much deeper. Jason's company, once teetering on the edge of success, began to collapse under pressure. Investors sensing weakness pulled their support. Partners distanced themselves. His carefully built empire, which had always been more illusion than reality, was crumbling. No one wanted to be associated with someone whose reputation had become a liability. Emily's fall was even swifter. She had relied on connections, on the fragile belief that beauty and charm alone would secure her a place among the elite. But now the same people who had once entertained her presence barely acknowledged her. Without status, without influence, she was nothing more than an afterthought. It would have been easy to watch from a distance, to remain an unseen force orchestrating their demise. But I wanted them to feel it, to truly understand the depth of their mistake. So I sent the final message. I only did what you always thought was impossible. Jason never responded. He wouldn't. Because what could he say? He had spent years believing he had won, believing I had been nothing more than a footnote in his life. But now, standing at the edge of his downfall, he realized the truth. I had been patient. I had been methodical. And when the time had come, I had taken everything. I heard rumors about them afterward. Jason attempting to rebuild, grasping at any opportunity he could find, only to be met with closed doors. Emily retreating from the public eye, a shadow of the woman she once was. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final plea for redemption. Just the slow, inevitable unraveling of everything they had built on lies. And I moved forward. Revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about reclaiming my power, about ensuring that they could never diminish me again. And as I stood atop the empire I had built, I realized the most important truth of all. I didn't need to look back, as I had already won. The headlines had done their job. The world that Jason and Emily once thrived in had turned its back on them, shutting them out with the same ease with which they had once dismissed me. Their downfall had not been dramatic. It had been slow, agonizing, and deliberate, exactly as I had planned. Jason's company, once a promising venture, had imploded under the pressure of scrutiny. Investors withdrew and his business partners distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man whose name now carried an unmistakable stain. His desperate attempts to salvage his reputation were met with polite refusals, a few awkward smiles, and an unspoken truth. No one wanted to work with someone who had become a liability. Emily had fared no better. The same social circles that had once welcomed her with open arms now barely acknowledged her presence. The invitations stopped coming, the messages dried up, and the brand collaborations she had prided herself on disappeared overnight. She had built her image on connections, and now, with those severed, she was nothing more than a relic of a past no one wanted to remember. I had been watching them carefully, ensuring that their fall was as complete as it was irreversible. But now it was time for the final act. The invitation arrived on their doorstep on a crisp autumn morning, its gold lettering glinting in the soft light. A private event. An exclusive opportunity. One last chance. Jason was the first to react, suspicion flickering across his face as he ran his fingers over the elegant card. This has to be a trap. Emily, desperation tightening her features, snatched the invitation from his hands. What if it's not? She argued. What if this is our way back in? Jason hesitated. He wasn't naive. He knew this had my signature all over it. But the thought of fading into obscurity, of being nothing, was too much for him to bear. Against his better judgment, he agreed. The night of the event, they arrived at the venue, a towering, glass-walled mansion perched high above the city. It was breathtaking, a masterpiece of modern architecture and excess. The kind of place that whispered power in the most understated way. They stepped inside, greeted by the quiet murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a string quartet. The guests were exactly the kind of people they had once longed to be associated with. Executives, celebrities, influencers. People whose presence alone was enough to make or break a reputation. Jason adjusted his cufflinks, his confidence returning. Maybe this was it. Maybe they could still fix everything. Then they saw me. I stood near the center of the room, speaking with a group of high-profile investors, my laughter light, effortless. My presence commanded attention, the power dynamic so vastly different from the last time we had stood in the same space. Jason stiffened, his eyes meeting mine. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in them, the realization that this wasn't a chance at redemption. This was something else entirely. Emily was the first to move, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached. "Lena," she breathed, forcing a smile. "You look incredible." I returned the smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Emily," I replied smoothly. "I didn't expect you to accept the invitation." Jason's jaw tightened. "We thought it might be an opportunity to clear things up." I tilted my head slightly. "Oh." Emily was quick to chime in. "Look, we get it. The past is the past. But we're willing to move forward. No hard feelings." I let the silence stretch between us, enjoying the way their confidence wavered under my gaze. Then with a small chuckle I gestured toward the room. "By all means. Enjoy the evening." They exchanged a glance, uncertain but unwilling to admit defeat. So they did as I suggested, weaving through the crowd, trying to insert themselves into conversations, attempting to reclaim the status they had lost. But something was off. Every smile directed their way was strained. Every conversation they tried to engage in fizzled before it could begin. People shifted away subtly, their interest in Jason and Emily vanishing the moment they realized who they were. Confusion set in. Emily's grip tightened around her champagne glass, her eyes darting from guest to guest. Jason's fingers clenched into a fist at his side, frustration simmering beneath the surface. And then it happened. A quiet murmur rippled through the room as a journalist, one of my carefully placed guests, casually brought up their history. "Oh, you're those two," she mused, tilting her head. "I read about you. The ones who tried to climb their way up by stepping on others." Emily's face drained of color. "That's not." "Oh, and Jason," another guest added, feigning curiosity. "Didn't your company just collapse?" "Tough break." Jason stiffened, his entire body tensing. "That's not what happened." But it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The whispers grew louder, the quiet rejection turning into open disregard. And then, in the most subtle yet devastating act of all, the crowd simply moved past them. Conversations resumed, laughter echoed, and Jason and Emily were left standing there, alone, invisible, completely irrelevant. They had once thought themselves untouchable. Now they weren't even acknowledged. I approached then, my expression composed, my voice soft but firm. "You never understood, did you?" I mused. "Power isn't about stepping on people. It's about making sure that when you walk into a room you belong there." I let my gaze sweep over them. "And you don't." Jason exhaled sharply, his face a mask of barely contained anger. "You planned this." I met his stare without flinching. "I simply let the world see you for what you are." Emily shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "You wanted us to feel this." "To feel nothing." A slow smile curved my lips. "Exactly." I turned, walking away without another word. The crowd parted for me effortlessly, a silent acknowledgement of the position I now held. Jason and Emily remained frozen, surrounded yet utterly alone. I didn't need to watch them leave. I already knew they would. Jason and Emily left the gala with their heads bowed, but I knew the weight they carried was far heavier than just humiliation. It was the crushing realization that they had become the very thing they once mocked: outcast. Their presence had been erased, their relevance stripped away, and their once glorious social standing had crumbled to dust. But I wasn't done yet. I sat in my penthouse that night, sipping a glass of water, watching the cityscape through floor-to-ceiling windows. A part of me expected satisfaction, a surge of victory. But the feeling that settled over me was something different: calculated calmness. The pieces had fallen exactly where I had placed them, yet I knew the final act had yet to play out. Jason and Emily had spent their entire lives believing they were invincible, that they could manipulate and discard people without consequence. But now, for the first time, they were the ones with no options left. And when people are desperate, they become unpredictable. The next morning, my assistant knocked softly on my office door, an unusual tightness in her posture. "Lena, there's someone downstairs asking to see you." "It's Jason." I didn't react immediately, setting my pen down with a measured movement. And Emily? He's alone. That was unexpected. Jason had always hidden behind Emily's influence, just as she had hidden behind his charisma. For him to come alone meant one of two things. Either they had turned on each other, or he was here out of genuine desperation. I wasn't sure which amused me more. Send him up, I said simply. Minutes later, the elevator doors slid open and Jason stepped in hesitantly. He looked different. The confident, untouchable man who had once smirked down at me on prom night was gone. In his place was someone gaunt, worn down by the weight of failure. His expensive suit, though still immaculate, couldn't mask the exhaustion in his eyes. Lena. His voice lacked its usual bravado. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit. He hesitated before obeying, his movements slow, uncertain. He placed his hands on the desk, fingers lacing together as he exhaled sharply. I need your help. The words hung in the air, heavy with irony. I tilted my head slightly. Help. Jason swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. You proved your point. You won. But Emily and I, we lost everything. The business, the connections, everything is gone. And I know you had something to do with it. A small smile played on my lips. Had something to do with it? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. You orchestrated it. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to ask if there's a way to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You want me to undo everything? His fingers clenched into a fist. I'm not asking for a miracle. Just a second chance. I tapped my nails against the glass surface of my desk, watching him carefully. Jason, tell me, why do you think you deserve one? His nostrils flared. Because people make mistakes. I nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Then I leaned forward, my voice soft yet cutting. But some mistakes don't come with do-overs. His jaw tensed, frustration flickering in his eyes. Lena, please. You got what you wanted. You destroyed us. I get it. But I'm still here trying to fix things. Doesn't that count for something? I let out a quiet breath, tilting my head as if considering. Then after a long pause I finally spoke. Let me ask you something, Jason. If I were the one sitting in your chair all those years ago, would you have given me a second chance? His silence was answer enough. I stood up, walking to the window, my arms crossed as I stared out at the city below. You never understood, did you? Power isn't something you're given. It's something you build piece by piece. And once you have it, you don't just give it away because someone suddenly regrets their choices. I turned back to face him. I didn't ruin you, Jason. You did that yourself. His shoulders sank. The last remnants of his pride crumbled in that moment, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his expression. Genuine regret. But it was too late for that. Jason exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. What happens now? I gave him a knowing look. Now. You do what I had to do all those years ago. You start over. His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to argue, but he knew there was no point. He had built his life on manipulation, but this time, there was no one left to manipulate. He had played the game and he had lost. He stood up slowly, nodding once. I guess that's it then. I watched as he walked toward the elevator, pausing for just a moment before stepping inside. When the doors closed, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no hatred. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that for once Jason was the one left standing in the rain, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. But I wasn't naive. Emily hadn't come with him, and that meant she wasn't done fighting. Unlike Jason, who crumbled under pressure, Emily was a survivor. She wouldn't go down without a final attempt to claw her way back up. And I was ready for her. Jason had left with defeat weighing on his shoulders, but I knew the battle wasn't over yet. There was still Emily. She had always been the more cunning of the two, the one who could read a room, twist a story, and play the victim when needed. While Jason had confronted me with reluctant humility, she had stayed in the shadows, plotting her next move. And that meant she wasn't finished. The next morning I received a message from an unknown number. Meet me. One last time. There was no name, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was. She had chosen a high-end rooftop lounge, the kind of place that reeked of exclusivity and old money. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, a glass of something amber in front of her, untouched. Her eyes were shaded behind oversized sunglasses, her posture relaxed, but I knew it was all an act. She was calculating, waiting for my reaction, assessing whether she still had any leverage left. I slid into the chair across from her, crossing my legs as I folded my hands neatly in my lap. "You've been quiet," I noted. Emily finally removed her sunglasses, placing them on the table with deliberate precision. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I'd see in her: uncertainty. "I had to think," she admitted, swirling the liquid in her glass. "Had to decide if I wanted to fight or walk away." I arched an eyebrow. "And?" Her lips curved into a faint smirk. "I think you already know." Of course she wouldn't walk away. Not Emily. She wasn't built for surrender. She had spent her entire life crafting the illusion of perfection, of control. And now that it was slipping away, she was desperate to cling to whatever was left. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "You're smart, Lena. I'll give you that. You played the long game and you played it well." She exhaled, tilting her head. "But let's be real here. You don't want this to drag on forever. You don't want to waste any more time on us." I remained silent, letting her talk. "So," she continued, "what if we made a deal?" "A deal?" I almost laughed. Even now, she was trying to negotiate, trying to find an escape route. I tilted my head slightly. "What kind of deal?" Her fingers tapped against the glass. "You let me back in. Help me rebuild. I know people, Lena. People who can be useful to you." Her voice was smooth, persuasive. "You don't have to destroy me. We can make this work." For a brief moment, I simply watched her. She truly believed she still had something to offer. That I would be tempted by the idea of keeping her around, of using her in some capacity. But what she failed to understand was that I had already won. There was nothing she could give me that I didn't already have. I leaned forward, mirroring her posture. "Emily," I said softly, my voice laced with something close to amusement. "You still don't get it, do you?" She blinked, her confidence wavering. I smiled then, slow and deliberate. "You are not a player in this game anymore. You are not an asset. You are not someone I need." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "You are irrelevant." Her breath hitched ever so slightly, but she masked it well. Till I saw it. The way her fingers tensed, the way her expression faltered for just a second. "I don't need to keep you around," I continued. "Because the world has already moved on. And you're just another forgotten name." For the first time she had no response. She sat there, staring at me, the weight of her downfall finally crashing down around her. I stood, adjusting my coat as I grabbed my purse. "Enjoy your drink, Emily," I said lightly. "It might be the last time anyone serves you with any importance." I turned and walked away, leaving her there, drowning in the realization that she was truly, utterly alone. That was the last time I ever saw Emily. In the weeks that followed, the final pieces of their old lives unraveled completely. Jason attempted to recover, to build something new, but he was no longer the man people trusted. Emily faded from social circles, trying to claw her way back in, but no one had space for a woman whose relevance had expired. I, on the other hand, thrived. My name carried weight in every room I entered. My empire expanded, my influence deepened, and the past no longer held any power over me. I had taken the pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, and turned it into something untouchable. One evening, as I stood in my office, gazing out at the city I now ruled, my phone buzzed with a notification. A news article. "Former socialite Emily West sells off assets. Disappears from public eye." The headline didn't surprise me. It was inevitable. I stared at the screen for a moment before swiping the notification away. And just like that, she was gone. Not with a grand exit. Not with one last desperate grasp for attention. Just gone. I turned back to the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle below me. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about anger. It was about control. And I had never felt more in control than I did in that moment. I had won. And I would never look back.